Good afternoon. Oh, wait a second. Sorry. Shows over here. I don't know why you can't see it there. Please stand by as we get everything turned on. All right, it works. Take a second to read that. Bruce Schneider is a cryptanalyst. He's developed several algorithms for cryptography. Okay. Today we're talking about authentication. Do some of that, and then we'll at the end we'll do some review for the exam that is on Wednesday. All right. The authentication process is validate who you are, who you claim to be, and can we decide that that in fact is true and that we know who you are. This is a little different from authorization. Authorization is what you're allowed to do once we decide who you are. So the first question is, who are you? Most of the time, we use user ID and passwords. That's because user ID and passwords are very easy to implement. And they sort of work. They're not too bad, as long as you use a reasonable password. As we know from the password cracking assignment, that common passwords can easily be defeated. In the user ID password, of course, the first thing you do is you enter your user ID, which tells the system who you claim to be, and then the password is used to authenticate that, yes, in fact, you are who you claim to be. There are all sorts of problems with passwords. In fact, passwords are not really a great way to provide security. Some of the issues we have here are how do you get the password to the user, particularly the first time? What do you do when you forget the passwords? Often people will call up on a phone line or say, I've forgotten my password. And I say, oh, okay, who are you? And then they'll give you your password. That check may not be nearly as strong as other checks. Yes. Excuse me? No, we're on authentication. Authentication. We're authentic. And we'll move to review later on. Okay. People can guess it in the course. People frequently do not use good passwords. You can see here the sticky note. The sticky notes are all over the place. You can find all sorts of computers with sticky notes on them telling you what the password is. Phishing is a topic we will talk about later on in a couple of weeks, but it involves asking people for the password. It's much easier to get in if somebody will just tell you what the password is. As you know, there are many popular passwords. We used a file of 7,800 popular passwords. And everybody's list of popular passwords is different. This is a list here. You can see a lot of them are numerical. Almost all the numerical ones are the numbers in order. You can see there's a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 digit password, all numerical orders. Note that the top 10 numerical pins, that is just numbers noted. When you go to the bank or something, when you enter a numerical pin, the top most common ones account for 50% of all that are used. So the other 50% are rarely used ones. As I mentioned earlier, questions about how do you get the users the password, particularly the first time. How do you tell the user what the password is the first time? Now, in a lot of systems, you'll ask the user, tell me what you want for a password. Who are you? Sometimes, like here at A&T, they're going to give you an email account, and they're going to base the password on something that supposedly only you know. Frequently, they'll use like the first couple letters of your email address and the last few digits of your social security number or your banner ID number, which would work if nobody else knew those, except banner IDs tend to be posted all over the place. So getting your password is a challenge. Here's our first question of the day. Oops, sorry. Oh, yes. Sorry. Well, let's get this going. I'm dealing with all sorts of issues here. Yeah. Oh. Oh, I gotta see it. Oh. Okay. So I think B is a real popular answer. C, some people would see C is actually C is the answer. C, because if 50% of the 50% of the passwords are the 10 most common ones, if you guess the 10 most common ones, 50% of the time you'll have made it in. So the answer is C 50% of the time. Hang on, I am going to stop this for a minute. Yes. How do I stop this? All right. And stand by, everyone. We're trying to see if we can get this sucker to work. There we go. Sort of. Let's. And just a minute. There, we're back. I apologize. Sometimes it doesn't always work the way you'd like it to work. Okay, replay. Yes, we have a question. Oh, I don't remember. I think it was a 4-digit password. I think it was a 4-digit numerical PIN or password, of which 50% are the most common. You can bet 1, 2, 3, 4 is one of the most common passwords. The next most common one is probably 9876. Another issue you have to worry about is replay threats. If somebody manages to capture an encrypted password going by, they may be able to play it again, even if they don't know what it says. They can't decrypt it. Good encryption will avoid that. Now, there are several things you can do to improve passwords. Some sites will ask you, or excuse me, tell you some information when you enter your user ID. So as you enter your user ID, it will say something that it knows about you. And if that's correct, you go on. If it doesn't say the proper phrase, then it may not be the right site and you better watch out. There are a couple ways to do password guessing. We did this for our password cracking assignment. Exhaustive searching takes a long time because there are a lot of characters you can try. Dictionary attacks work really well. That's what we were doing on our assignment. We had a list of passwords. It wasn't a very big list, but you can get a list of much more extensive list. There are only 470,000 English words. Not too many are used. There are password lists of the top 1,000,000 passwords. And if you try those, you're likely to get most passwords. So you really can't stop somebody from guessing your password, but you can make it harder. Now, if somebody gets into your system and steals the password file, the file that contains everybody's passwords, you can be in big trouble because they can now log in as almost anybody. And it requires everybody to change their password to keep them out. That's not very effective. What most systems do is hash them. They will hash their passwords and store the hash. Say SHA-1 or SHA-256. When the password comes in, they will encrypt it as SHA-1 and store that hash, 160 bits. And then when you go to log in, you get your password, they hash it, they read the database. Does this match the password you're supposed to have, the hash? And if it matches, you're in. If it doesn't match, you don't log in. The advantage there is because SHA-1 is a one-way function. You can't go backwards. But even if somebody knows the password that it's supposed to be, the hash that it's supposed to be, they don't know what password they can enter to get that hash. There are multiple algorithms to make looking up large password hash files easier. You know, dictionary tables where you've hashed all the popular passwords, all 470,000 words or the top 1,000,000 passwords, you've hashed them all in the background, saved a huge file with 1,000,000 hashes. And then you look in that file whenever you get your information. There are rainbow tables, which are an algorithm that helps looking up faster and stores less data. But the basic idea is somebody gets the list of top 1,000,000 passwords, hashes them all, stores the hashes in a file, and then if they get the hash file of passwords, they can look up and see what they were. They can look up the hashes. They can't actually go backwards, but assuming it's one of the top 1,000,000 popular passwords, they can look and see which one it was. And if it was one of the top 1,000,000, they've got it. And since users tend to use a lot of repetitive passwords, if you can get a list of passwords, you can then probably find somebody's password out there that they used a commonly used password. Salting is a way to make that process more difficult. The whole idea is that you in the background, you create all those passwords. But if you add a random number to it, then that makes the password generation all that much more difficult. In fact, much, much more difficult. So here, you take a random number and add it. Now you have to know what that random number is, but you don't have to tell anybody else what it is. That way, they can generate all sorts. Now, if you know what user ID you're going after, this doesn't really help any, but it does in the general problem of trying to hash all the possible passwords. And of course, as they always tell you, use a long password with lots of different characters. Here's a table I calculated, given the number of number of characters that you have and how many characters you're choosing from. So if you're just doing numbers, 10 different numbers, it's really simple. If there are 8 characters, it's 10 to the 8th possible passwords. If you've got 62 alphanumerics, that's all the letters upper and lower case and the numbers. Then that gives you 2.2 times 10 to the 14 passwords if you're doing 8 characters. And a lot of systems require 8 characters or more. If you were to use all the characters in the keyboard, there are 94 on my keyboard, then you're up to 6 times 10 to the 15. That's a really big number. And if you randomly choose them from the keys of the keyboard, that will take a very long time. You can see the difference between doing a short password, say 4 characters with letters, it's 10 to the 8th more difficult with many more characters. That's a long time. One thing you can do is you can slow down people's guess time. Every time they make a wrong guess, you wait twice as long as before you allow them to enter a new password. So the first time you let them wait a second, the next time you make them wait 2 seconds, then 4 seconds, then 8 seconds. It doesn't take long before they're waiting for a very long time. Let's see how long it takes. Here's a question asking how long will it take? Okay, the time we're looking at is how long will it take when you first try the first password till you try the 10th password. Okay. I see it doesn't work if I can't see it. Actually, the phone can't see it. What was that? Oh, okay. That's all we got. All right. B and C is a very popular. C is going up. B and C is a very popular answer. We're going to end the poll online. The answer is D, 1,023 seconds. That's 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus 8 plus 16. How do you count that? Think binary numbers. Think of a binary number. You've got 1, 2's bit, 4-bit, the 8-bit, all the way across 10 bits. We have 10 bits. 2 to the 10 is 1,024. You win less than that, so it's 1,023. Okay. That will not be on the test. Frequently, when you go to log in, at least when I go to log in, the browser or the operating system knows passwords that I've done. So I go to a website and it says enter user ID and password, but the browser fills in those fields, so I don't have to. That's really convenient for me, because it's really convenient for somebody who uses my computer and wants to log in as me, because they don't have to enter the user ID and password. It's right there. So it's a technique that you can use, but then you have to make sure that you secure your computer so that nobody else can get in. There are a variety of tools to log in to your Windows system if you forget your password, but they are not easy. Typically, you have to generate a USB that you'll then boot up. That can be difficult. Oh, sorry. I think I mentioned forgotten passwords, many ways to recover those. A trick some people will do for stealing passwords, say in a library or someplace where you're using public computers, you write a little program that displays what looks very much like the standard system login page. It has a little box that says enter user ID and password, but it's not the operating system, it's your program, right? Full screen. And then you just start it and you walk away. Somebody comes by, they see the login screen or what looks like the login screen, it's really your program, and they enter the user ID, password, and press enter. Your program takes that information, stores it someplace, often some web server, and then logs out and let the user try again. They just think they must have done something wrong and it logs in again. Gotta make sure you're logging into the real system. Now, instead of sending your user ID and password, there are other systems that work with the password. Here's an idea that's used multiple times. Say Alice wants to log into the Bob system. So Alice sends a message to Bob saying, I'm Alice, and here's a nonce or nonce. Remember that the nonce is a random number that you're going to use once. So you send it there. It's used to ensure that the system you're logging into is in fact the correct system. So assume that Alice and Bob share a key, share, say, a symmetric key, an AES key. So Alice sends a message to Bob, unencrypted, says, I'm Alice, I want to log in. Bob sends a message back and encrypts that nonce that Alice sent with the key that Alice and Bob know. So Alice gets the number, decrypts it because Bob and Alice have a shared key, decrypts it. Is this the number I sent to Bob? If it's not the number you sent, then it's not a good login. It's not the real Bob. And of course, if it doesn't decrypt correctly, it's definitely not real Bob. Alice then sends another message to Bob with some function of one. That could be very simple, like add one to the nuts, they get encrypted. So Bob knows, yes, Alice could decrypt the message, she could do the appropriate function on it, and then send it back to Bob. So now both Alice and Bob are assured they're talking to the correct parties. They have not sent their password over the network. They've used their password as a key, but they've never sent the password back and forth, except for sometime in the dawn of the system where they initialize passwords. And there are many ways to initialize passwords, but assuming they have a shared password, here you can log in without sending the password back and forth. Note that the password doesn't really identify you. It identifies somebody who knows your password. So it's not any real authentication that you are you. It's authentication that you are somebody who has your user ID and password. There are many ways to authenticate people. What you know, what you have, who you are, and what you can do. We've been talking about what you know. What you know is like, I know my user ID and password. That's one way of doing it. Another way is something you have. You can have your phone. Frequently, systems will say, if you have your phone, you can log into the system. ID cards, smart cards, USB with a security file, you plug it into the system. It has something you have that you can log in. I had a system that I could put in my pocket, and when I got within a few feet of my computer, it would allow me to log in. If I walked away, it would no longer allow me to log in. So it's something you have in your possession, and without that, you cannot log in. Where you are, us systems care about where you are. And so if you're on campus, you can do things. Here at the university, there are systems you can access if you're on the university network. You cannot access them from someplace else. So there are several university systems that I cannot access from home. You can only access if you're coming there from a network connection that is on campus. You can get fancier and use global positioning systems, GPS, to identify where you are. And you can say, well, I have to be here. I have to be in this place. The GPS has a certain accuracy, but you can say, I've got to be in my house or within a couple hundred yards of my house. You can also get very general and say, I can't be here. I must be in the United States. I cannot be in certain other countries. If I am, don't allow me to log in. Not only can you use GPS, but sometimes you can use the network IP address and determine where it comes from. And then there's questions of what you can do. What sort of thing can you do that other people cannot do? People have tested your ability to key in a well-known phrase, frequently your name. How fast or how do you type your name? If you accurately measure the time between each keystroke, you'll find it's very difficult for somebody else to duplicate that, because you've been typing your name with your fingers. You just type your name, and if it matches to some extent the previously measured time it takes to type the keyword, each inner key distance or each inner key timing, and it's very unlikely that somebody else can do it. It's not a perfect system, but it does make it more difficult for somebody else to log in as you. And there are biometrics, all sorts of biometrics. I just mentioned keystrokes, there's voice, and then there's the physiological ones, things they can look at and measure. Let me go over some of those. Okay. Fingerprints. For several years, I had a fingerprint reader up here in my office when I had an office at A&T. It was interesting that at the time when I had a biometric measure, there were several faculty members working on biometric research, but none of them actually had a biometric device. They just did research on it. I actually used one. Some of the things I noticed is that my fingerprint had to be re-registered, that after a while, it wouldn't work very well anymore. It'd take many tries before it would log in. Then I'd say, okay, this is me. Once you log in, you can register your finger. You put it on the fingerprint reader and say, this is me. You do that half a dozen times, and it goes, okay, I know who you are. And after that, then you could log in. But it seemed to drift. Fingerprint readers are pretty simple and inexpensive. They generally have high reliability, although not everybody can use them. Some people don't have much of a fingerprint. Sometimes people's fingers are some people's fingers are smooth, or you can injure your fingers, in which case they don't work. And of course, it's taking a picture of your fingerprint when you put it on the fingerprint reader, and that moves left, right, rotates. So you have to be able to handle that. A lot of phones now use fingerprint readers to gain access, and Microsoft has got a system to do fingerprint reading. Of course, it all depends who knows your fingerprints. A while ago, I wanted to get quick access to the airport, TSA pre-check. In order to do TSA pre-check, you got to give them your fingerprints. They know who you are. So I gave the TSA my fingerprints for my simple access of going through the airport. And of course, fingerprint doesn't have to be attached to the hand if you watch all the movies. There are all sorts of ways to forge the fingerprint. You watch the movies, people do this. There's one on gummy bears. You can Google it up, how to do gummy bear fakes of your fingerprints. 3D printing has made it easy. You can now 3D print something, put it on a glove. You copied somebody's fingerprints, you put it on a glove. Now you have gloves, little rubber gloves with their fingerprints on them. When you touch things, you leave their fingerprints. And so they're not perfect. You can, and of course, you go around touching things and you leave your fingerprints. When you use biometrics, there are two different ways you can use them that have different complexity. One is identification. Who are you? This is where you read in the newspaper that the government's got a camera and they're watching people go by down the street and identifying who they are with computer facial recognition. That's much more difficult than verification, where you go up to the system and you go, hi, I'm Ken Williams, and it looks at you and says, I think you are Ken Williams. Because then it only has to compare to one. Otherwise, if you have 1 million people in your database, it looks at a face and has to match it to 1 million people, which may not be very accurate. Of course, it can fail in multiple ways. Big failure is when there's false positives and false negatives. False positive is it says, oh, this person's okay, when in fact it's not. Or false negative is when it says, no, I don't think that's really Ken Williams, and in fact it is me. So you have to allow a certain predefined threshold. How close is the match going to be? You have to decide what the effective failure rate is. How bad can it be before you get upset with it? And of course, how bad can the false acceptance rate be before that's really dangerous? So you have the rate at which it's going to false negatives and the rate at which you have false positives. And then there's the equal error rate where it matches. So you have those two. At some point, those charts cross, and that's the point. There are other ways to do this biorecognition. There's finger vein recognition. This is one I learned about last year. This is where they shine a particular bright light through your finger. It goes right through your finger, and they can see the pattern of the veins in your finger, which are supposedly unique to each person. Since it's kind of difficult just a normal day to see my veins in my fingers, then most people can't. Fingerprints are leaving all over the place. People can see your face, but they don't usually see the pattern of veins in your fingers. Unless you can do something tricky, like trick them to put their hand into something and take a picture. And again, facial recognition is commonly used. My phone uses facial recognition, and it works some of the time. Some of the time, particularly if it's dark, doing it in the dark, it can't see me, it doesn't recognize me. Other times, it doesn't recognize me. In the world with COVID, people wearing masks didn't work very well. Although I'm told that the Apple face recognition did get around the mask problem. They could recognize people with masks, and they're pretty accurate. You can fool many facial recognition systems by holding up a picture of the person. So if you want to log in my system, you take a picture of me sometime, or you find a picture of me on the web, they're out there, and then you print it up, nice life size, 8x10 color glossy, and when you come to log in, you hold the picture up in front of the camera, and it goes, oh yeah, that's me, and it logs you in. It works, we tried it. In fact, I had a graduate student working on a system, and we tried this, and oh yes, you can log in from some systems. So she developed a system that would ask you to move in certain ways. Turn right, turn left, put your right hand up. And then if you didn't do that, if the image didn't do that, it's probably not you, it's a fake. Of course, then you could do it if you had a picture of the person, or you could somehow generate with AI a picture of the individual doing all these actions, and it might work. But that makes it much more difficult. There are speaker recognition systems where you talk into the system and it says, yep, I think you are. I use somebody's system. I can't even remember, but it does voice recognition, where if I have to call up and ask the question, I have to say a certain phrase that compares that to when I said the phrase the first time logging in, and tries to recognize me. It's one way you can do that. Of course, if the person has a cold or bronchitis or laryngitis, it's not going to work real well. And of course, it's vulnerable to replay attacks. If you record the person talking, then you can play that back and it sounds like them. Apparently, the iris of your eye or the retina, the part that you can't see normally, it's the back of the eye that takes the image. Those have patterns of veins, or the eyes have patterns on them that are supposed to be unique or unique enough to identify people. So you can use those. Some A&T researchers were working on retina recognition for a while. You have to get a good picture. Often that's done by having a device the person looks in, like a microscope thing they look in. It's actually just taking a picture of their eye. So, oh, that works. My optometrist sells funny looking contact lenses that you can put in for Halloween, like that. That, of course, would ruin the contact iris recognition. Or if you're really tricky and you've managed to take a picture of somebody's eye, then you can make a contact lens that looks like somebody else's eye, put it in your eyes, and then it would pass their iris recognition. The big problem with biometrics is how do you revoke them? If somebody learns your password, you can make a new password, not a problem. If somebody gets your fingerprints, you can't get new fingerprints. That just doesn't work. So that does make it a problem. So sometimes fingerprints are used with other factors. Many systems use multi-factor recognition. That is, they will not only ask you for like a user ID password, but use one of the biometrics, one of the many other items I just mentioned, something you can do, something you have. Yes, there we go. Let's see if we can get this to work. Maybe not. Oh, that's too bad. It's not going to play my my video. Okay. Oh, there it goes.
Edna mode.
Sound. That's from The Incredibles. You notice 4 factors: handprint, eye scanned, password, voice recognition. Does everything. Most people use 2-factor recognition with your phone. They'll have you enter a user ID and password and then send a message to your phone. Their authentication system, A&T uses an authentication on your system on your phone. Works pretty quickly, in my experience. Go to log in, it says, oh, tell the system this 2-digit number. You look on your phone, it's come up, you enter the 2-digit number, say, yes, that's me, and the system logs in. That way, not only do you know your user ID and your password, but it's something you have. It's something you know and something you have. You have your phone, and so unless somebody else has their phone or can fake it somehow, they can log in as you. CAPTCHAs are a little different. CAPTCHAs are systems for trying to determine whether the person logging in is a person or a computer. They're getting, well, no, they're not as effective as they used to be. Yes, CAPTCHA is completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and humans apart. A Turing test is a test developed way back by Alan Turing. About can a computer communicate with a human to a point where the human does not know whether it's communicating with a computer or another human. So typically you've seen these things. They'll show you a bunch of pictures, which one has a motorcycle in it, which one has a bridge in it, and you click the ones. And even though in your eyes, you've clicked every motorcycle on that array of pictures, it tells you, no, try again. They have some challenges. They usually try to go for things that humans can solve. Sometimes other systems will ask questions, common sense questions. What color is the sky on a clear day? Humans know it's blue. A lot of computers don't know that. They don't go out on a clear day. So yeah, we have cloud computing. They don't have clear day computing. So they don't know that. You're going to ask those sort of questions. Although in this AI world, they're much better at solving that. There are other tricks that you can get around that. One way is to put somebody else's CAPTCHAs on your system. So if you have a high volume website, you can display the CAPTCHAs. As you grab somebody else's CAPTCHA, display it in your system, they answer it. Now you have the answer, and you build up a database of their pictures and the proper answers until now you have all the things you need. Your computer can just go out and log in whenever it wants to. Might point out that that's actually against the law, that the Digital Millennium Copyright Act says, no, trying to defeat CAPTCHAs is against the law. Oh, we're not going to do this question. It's a math question. It's a probability and statistics question. I'll just tell you the answer. You can see if you've got two methods of verification, two-factor authentication, and somebody can get by one of them 20% of the time, and get by the other one 40% of the time. Well, if you're going to use both, what's the probability they get by? Well, it's just 20% of 40%, which is 8%. So it reduces the probability that somebody can get in by quite a bit. And here's another acronym for you, TOCTTOU, which is time of check to time of use. That is, when did you check that this person is who they say they are, compared to when you're actually doing something that they've authorized to. It's particularly important if it's a lengthy period of time. If somebody logs in the morning and then sometime in the afternoon, they take some action that you assume they are still that person, where the time between the check and the time of use tends to be very long. Some systems only allow you to go so far before it will recheck your authorization. So that's authorization. Any questions about that? Okay, now let's do a review for the exam coming up. There it is, okay. And I'll share my screen. And there we are. Okay. I'd like to quote. Okay, our first exam is Wednesday, 2 days from now. It'll be available online on Blackboard for everybody. It'll be online, even if you are normally here in the live studio audience, it will be online. It starts at 6 a.m. and goes to midnight. That's 18 hours. It is not an 18-hour exam. In fact, for all those people keep asking me, how long is the exam? Oh, I've written most of it. It'll be more than 10 questions, but less than 20, somewhere along there. I expect it will not take you more than an hour and a half, 2 hours to do. But please check how long it takes you to do it. And then afterwards, we'll have a little survey and we'll see how long it takes. I like to know that because every now and again, I create an incredibly evil exam and it takes people hours and hours. It wasn't my intent. I thought everybody would know that. So I want to know. And we will be asking a question afterwards to find out how bad was it. There will be no class in person Wednesday. In fact, there'll be no lecture. At 4:30, I'm going to log into Zoom from my house and say, anybody have any questions? Which is kind of pointless because if you do have questions, don't wait till 4:30 on Wednesday to ask. Send me a text, send me an email, give me a call. Let me know if something's not right, particularly if Blackboard screws up, which it's been known to do on rare occasions. Sometimes not as rare as you'd like. So give me a call if you have a question about the question. Now, I wrote these questions trying to make them as clear as possible. I've had them reviewed by the TAs. And so hopefully they're easily understandable, but every now and again, somebody looks at it a different way and I go, yes, that's a reasonable interpretation of the question. It's not what I was thinking about. So let me know if you have any question about the question. And I'm not going to necessarily tell you the answer, but I'll try to explain what the question wants to know. I have about a half a dozen slides covering topics we didn't cover before that I thought I would pick up. Padding. Okay. Thinking encryption. Encryption is done in blocks. For instance, AES does 128-bit blocks. That's 16 bytes. So if the text that you are trying to encrypt is not an even multiple of 16 bytes, then there's going to be some mismatch between the ciphertext and the text. And so when it decrypts it, it has to be able to figure that out. How do I know how many bytes at the end are not real? You don't want to take the plain text and add junk bytes at the end. You want to give it back exactly as it was when they first encrypted it. So there are multiple padding algorithms how you can figure out what to do. Several of them add specific bytes at the end. And if your text looks, it comes again, reads the bytes backwards, and there's a pattern it's looking for, and it finds that it knows how many bytes there are supposed to be at the end. Well, then it just removes those bytes after it decrypts it. Another thing you can do, even if the information going across the network is encrypted, systems that are watching might be able to detect where the packet is going. Where is the destination address? What was the source address? How big is the packet? How many bytes were you sending each time? That gives an attacker some information. You can decrease the amount of information you give them by padding messages out to a fixed size. In other words, to say you never send packets shorter than this. And after that, there'll always be a certain multiple of some number that makes small changes difficult to observe. I think I mentioned this earlier, but human input is not very good for a key. When you type on the keyboard, there are 92 keys in the keyboard. I think every one of them leaves the upper bit as a 0 if you have an 8-bit byte. So at least one out of the 8 bits is always going to be 0. So it's not as strong a key as you'd like. You can make the key better for encryption. It doesn't make the key a lot better if you're comparing against keys, but you can make it a better encryption key by running it through a hash, like SHA-1. Take SHA-1 hash of the user's password, and then take for 16 bytes or however many bytes you need for encryption key and use that there. That, of course, is going to be all scrambled up because that's what the hash algorithms do. And because these are one way, even if somebody sees it, they can't go back and figure out what to enter. All right, time for a little review. We've talked about encryption and other topics. I mentioned encryption can do all sorts of things. We mentioned the first day that security was for confidentiality, keep people from seeing your information, integrity, making sure the information is correct and came from a valid source, availability, that's making sure the system keeps running. That's the CIA that most of the textbooks talk about. There's other 3 A's, authentication, which we talked about today, authorization, what can you do, and anonymity. We talk about privacy, that's a big topic. Encryption is very good for almost all of these, except not so good for availability, but can't have everything. All right. These are the chapters in the textbook or sections of the textbook that we have covered so far. You can see we've pretty much gone through chapters 1, 2, skip 3 and 4, go to 5, 6, 7, skip 8 and 9, jump to 10, 11, 12, and 13. Chapter 2, read chapter 2. You don't have to read chapter 2.3 as carefully as you might. Just zing through that one. But that's the topics of it. Topics that were in the book, that are in these chapters, that were not covered in class, will not be on the exam. This material generally reinforces what we covered in the lectures. It looks at the information in a different way, although I read the textbook. And so I often cover the material mentioned in the textbook. But nothing in the textbook that we didn't cover in lecture will be on the exam. The exam will cover these topics that we've covered throughout the semester so far: security policies, encryption, encryption techniques, MACs, message authentication codes, digital signatures, authentication, chafing and winnowing, and anything else we mentioned in class could be on the exam. I'll be more specific a little later on, but for those classroom lawyers, if I mentioned it in class, it could be on the exam. Okay. All right. What do we get from security? There's all sorts of ways you can attack. Eavesdropping is looking at the messages going across the network. Message tampering is changing the message. Masquerading is pretending you're somebody you aren't. And replay is when you save a message and show it again. We talked a little bit about the BIBA integrity model. This is an integrity model, not a confidentiality model. The Bell Laputa model is a confidentiality model. BIBA is an integrity model. This slide is in the wrong place. Okay, moving on. There are 2 basic encryption classes, symmetric and asymmetric. Symmetric uses the same key to encrypt and decrypt. AES is the most commonly used symmetric algorithm. And again, shown here, the user encrypts their stuff with a key and then is decrypted with the very same key. Somehow you have to pass the key to the other person. But you can do it many ways. You can hand them something. You can use a hybrid encryption where you use asymmetric encryption, encrypt the key, send it across. Lots of ways you can get it there. Asymmetric encryption, or which RSA is the most popular one, asymmetric encryption, often known as public key encryption, has 2 different keys: a public key that everybody gets to see, and a private key that nobody else should see. So in this example, if you want to send something, if Alice wants to send a message to Bob and she doesn't want anybody to see it but Bob, she can get Bob's public key, encrypt it, send it across the network. Anybody can get Bob's public key and anybody can send a message to Bob, but only Bob can decrypt it. So Eve, who's eavesdropping, can see a message coming across, but she doesn't know what it says because she doesn't have Bob's private key. The AES algorithm and DES are these substitution permutation stages. It goes through many stages where they exclusive OR the data with the key or a function of the key. Then they have substitution boxes or S boxes that do a bitwise substitution. And then they reorder the bits. In this example, everything looks like they're reordering it the same way, but in many systems, each stage has a different pattern for reordering it. And then the RSA encryption, where RSA uses the exponentiation mod number system. This is pretty common, where they take a message M, and you might think is M being a bunch of bits that are a text or an image, but bits are bits. You can think of those bits as a large integer number. And you can raise that integer number to a power E mod n, and it's another number. And there are several ways to do that with machine. And that gives you the ciphertext. And you can undo it where you take that ciphertext, you raise it to the power D, D is another part, mod n, and you get it. So the public key is E and N, and the secret key is D and N. The number N is the product of two large primes. Let me go over this algorithm here for making keys. Yes. N is the mod and modular, or where you divide the number and you get the remainder. Mod is the remainder function, where you divide something and it gives you the remainder. So we're looking at the remainder of the division. We don't care what the actual division result was. We want the remainder. And the remainder is always a number between 0 and n minus 1, because those remains. Okay, let me talk about that. I know I said I'm not going to ask you the details of the algorithm, but I am going to ask you about this. There is a question about this on the exam, so beware. All right, you got two big prime numbers, P and Q. And you multiply them together, and that gives you your N. Don't tell anybody what the P and Q are. And they make big primes, and there are algorithms for determining if a number is likely to be prime, and they do it enough, and you get very high probability the numbers are prime. Then they multiply it together, and you get your N. That's half of the private or secret key. Then you figure out this totem of N, where you take 1 minus P, and you multiply it times 1 minus Q. And that gives you this number. Then you choose some number E, any number you like to. That's going to be the public key number. Typically, it's a prime number, and it cannot divide into the totem of N. But you have to make sure that the greatest common divisor is 1. That is, number doesn't divide. If you divide the totem of N by E, you always get a remainder. No, so that's important, because if it divides evenly, the whole system gets messed up and doesn't work. So you pick an E, and there's greatest common divisor. There are all sorts of algorithms. Euclid, thousands of years ago, Euclid made an algorithm for finding the greatest common divisor. It's easy to do, and it's relatively computational. Okay, now that you got E, and so E and N are your public key, you got to figure out D to make your private key. And that's just simply just pick a D that is the modular inverse of E. There are algorithms to calculate modular inverse. Remember, there are no fractions. Everything's whole numbers here, integers, but it's modular. You're talking about remainders. So you want a number D that if you multiply D times E, it's 1 mod the totem of N. And there are algorithms out there that have been around for hundreds of years to calculate the modular inverse, and some of them are relatively efficient, some are not. So you calculate that. And then once you have D, D and N are the private key, and E and N are your public key. Go back and look at this. If you think about this real quick, we're raising M to the E power. And then we can undo that calculation by raising it to the inverse of E. D is the inverse of E. So if you squared something, that's the opposite of taking the square root. The square root is the half power. So if you take a number and square it, and then you take the result of that and you take the square root of it, you're back to the original number. If you take it and cube it, and then you take the cube root, you're back. If you take it to the very large number power and then take the inverse, it works. That's why the whole thing works. So that's how you compute these. Questions about this? Yes, question. Susie?
Could you explain E again?
Okay. E is just any number you want that's going to be part of the public key. The only trick is that E cannot evenly divide in the totem of N. So you randomly pick a number and then see if it divides. If it does, randomly pick another number. Typically, people pick prime numbers, because prime numbers, don't have any subfactors, and they won't divide. If you pick the number that's not prime, say you picked 6, which is 2 times 3, and maybe the totem of of n doesn't divide even by 6, but it might divide even by 2 or 3, and that will mess it up. That means the greatest common divisor might be 2 or 3. You need something that doesn't divide at all. And again, greatest common divisor, Euclid figured out how to do that thousands of years ago. Yes, sir. Excuse me, Toyton?
Yes.
I don't know what the meaning of Toyton is. Other than the RSA algorithm, I've never seen it before in my life. Somebody can Google that up and figure out what that is. I don't know. Yes. Oh, the goal is to make a pair of public and private keys to use the RSA algorithm. In other words, you can make up any random number for AES encryption, but RSA, you have to go through this algorithm to make a pair. You've got the public key, which is N and E, and you've got the private key, which is N and D. And so you tell everybody what N and E are, but you keep D secret. So D and N will allow you to decrypt it. So D and N are the privates, yes. It says here the secret key is D and N, but of course everybody knows N, so it's not that secret. All right, good enough? Everybody got this? Again, that's how you make the keys. Encryption performance, RSA is much, much slower than AES. AES is implemented in hardware. It can go up very quickly. They say you can do billions of bytes per second encrypted with your laptop, where doing this modular stuff does take some time. There are faster algorithms. You don't actually have to multiply M times itself E times. There are faster algorithms, but still it's not that fast. It does involve many, many multiplications, which are not particularly fast instructions. We talked a little bit about message authentication, where take a message, take a hash. A hash, again, is some algorithm, one-way function that takes all the bytes of the message and produces a number. SHA-1 produces a 160-bit number or 20-byte number. And if you change any bytes, any bit in the message, the hash will be different, quite a bit different, in fact. So you can create that hash, then encrypt the hash in any encryption algorithm you like, and then append to the message. And this is what you send along with the message and the hash. When it gets to the receiving side, they can determine whether it's an integrous message by taking that hash, decrypting it, however way you're supposed to decrypt. You can use public key or private key encryption, doesn't matter. And you also take that message and you hash it the same way they originally hashed it, SHA-1 or SHA-256, whatever you like, and you compare the results. If the hash you got decrypted is the same as the hash calculated, then you can be relatively sure that the message came from who said, somebody who has the key to do this, and it hasn't been changed along the way. It's the same concept as digital signatures. Digital signatures do the same thing. They take the plain text, they hash it, they encrypt it with the user's private key, send it across the network, and then anybody can validate it by using the user's public key. It's interesting to note that in the RSA, you can encrypt and decrypt either way. You have the private key and the public key. You can encrypt the public key and decrypt the private key, or you can encrypt the private key and decrypt the public key. Works both ways. And so here you can send it across. Anybody can validate it because anybody can get the public key, but they could not have made the hash correctly because they don't have your private key. Now, how do you know that you got the right public key? Easy thing to do is send it along with the message. You send a certificate. Certificates come from companies called certificate authorities that sell certificates. Oh, also there are certificate authorities that give them away for free. I think I had some of those in earlier documentation, how you can get certificates. cacert.org will give it to you. Other ways get it. Excuse me. But the whole concept is, here you have the data. There's the checksum of the data, SHA-1 or something, and that's encrypted with Alice's public key. Once again, Alice is sending this message to Bob. And how do you know you got Alice's public key? Well, you put Alice's public key right here in the certificate. This much, the green and the yellow, the key and the checksum of the key are part of the certificate. This is part of the message. So there it is. Now, how do you know that's correct? Well, there's a checksum of Alice's public key, and that checksum is encrypted with the certificate authority's private key. Everybody has the certificate authority's public keys. They put them in all your browsers. Chrome, Edge, Safari all have a list of certificate authorities and their big public keys. And that way, if you get the message, you can then do the checksum of Alice's public key and see if that is identical to the checksum that you decrypt with the public key. If it is, then you've got the right key, and you can keep on going until you're sure that the data is correct. When you do encryption, not only is it important to make sure you use the right encryption algorithm, you have to use it correctly. Stream encryption algorithms, such as cipher block chaining or Galileo's counter mode, are much more secure than electronic cookbook mode. Electronic cookbook mode is where you encrypt one block of plain text into one block of ciphertext. Identical blocks of plain text come out to be identical blocks of ciphertext. When you use a stream or chaining method, then each block of ciphertext is different, even if the plain text was identical. And you can see, we talked about this before, you take the ciphertext in the previous block, exclusive order with the plain text, then you encrypt it, and you save that ciphertext, and again, take that ciphertext for the next plain block. You start the whole process with an initialization vector. Initialization vector is just a bunch of bytes the same size as a plain text block, and it's a bunch of random numbers. And typically, you would get a random number, you would put it in the beginning of the file or something you're sending, and then store that data that is cipher blockchained or using one of the stream encryption modes. And so when somebody wants to decrypt it, they would read the initialization vector and supposedly know the key, and they would then be able to decrypt this using the decryption algorithm. But they have to have the correct initialization vector. You don't have to hide the initialization vector, and it can be different every time you send the message or every time you save the file. Hybrid cryptography is using both keys. We mentioned that AES is so much faster than RSA. So in this system, they use public key or RSA to encrypt the AES key instead of, well, the AES key is not very long. It's what, 128 bits up to 256 bits? That's not a very big message. Even a really slow encryption system can encrypt a short message like that quite quickly. So you use public key encryption, where you take the AES key, just again, random number, encrypt it with Bob's public key, send it over to Bob. Al sends it to Bob. Bob gets it. He can decrypt that random number with his private key that only he knows. And now he has the key that Al has sent to him. And from thenceforth, all the messages going back across the network are encrypted with the AES key that they just generated. Every time they do this, every time they start a new connection, they create a new AES key. This is what HTTPS does, or transport socket layers use this system. Okay, Bell Laputa model. Talked about that beginning of the semester. This is where you can write up, but you can't write down. You can read down, but you can't read up. This is the important relationship. This dominating relationship is the key to understanding how to tell what access people have. And I'll tell you, having written the exam, there are several questions about the Bell Laputa model because they're multiple choice questions, and I can get Blackboard to grade them for me. And when there's 83 people in the class, I need all the help I can get in grading this thing. So I have a couple multiple choice questions. Okay, this is the key to getting it, figuring out all the problems. You have user A and document B, and they have a level and a category, both the user and document. The user A dominates the object B if and only if the level of A is greater than or equal to level of B. And most of the time we have top secret, secret, confidential, and no encryption, unclassified. And so top secret's higher than secret, which is higher than confidential. And not only does the layer, excuse me, the level have to be higher, but the categories of the object have to be a subset of the categories of the user. Let's look at some examples. This user is top secret, and they've got nuke and ASI as their categories. They dominate secret nuke because top secret level is greater than secret, and nuke is a subset of nuke ASI. Okay. Yes, sir. They're two separate categories. Yes. Yes. So yes, this user has, we'll think maybe ASI is Asia. Nuke. This user has top secret clearance for nuclear weapons in Asia. Okay. And they can read things that are secret about nuclear weapons. Okay. Somebody might have secret clearance from nuke in Europe, and they can read something that's confidential nuke in Europe. They cannot write it, but they can read it. Now, this user's top secret and has the category nuclear weapons, but they do not dominate confidential Europe. Confidential is the lower level. The level problem is okay. They meet the level requirement, but nuke is, Europe is not a subset of nuke. Down here, confidential, well, the levels are wrong. And the last one, top secret dominates secret. But here, nuke and Europe are not a subset of this. There's nuke in here. This, the category B, has to be a subset of this, but it's not. In this case, A is a subset of B. So it does not dominate. Yes. Yes, in fact, that's what you see. Yeah, yes. If this was top secret Europe, nuke, or nuke Europe, then it would dominate. But it doesn't. And you think about it, this document is going to talk about nuclear weapons. This user is not cleared for nuclear weapons. They don't get to know that stuff. Yes. If a user dominates an object, they can read it. The object has to dominate the user to write it. Again, you can read if the subject, the human, dominates the object. And there's also other permissions. You can have, like it can be a Windows system. You can say, no, this user cannot access that file. So, okay. Write, again, writes down. And you can write if the object dominates the subject. Now, remember that. Write if and only if the object dominates the subject. So let's look at this one. Here, the user, Zachary, is secret, and they've got, and the categories COMP620 and graduate. He can write a top secret graduate document because the document, top secret dominates, the level is higher, and grad is a subset of this. But they can't do this because there's a TA object. They don't, this object has data, and this is the same level, but there are objects here. This is not a subset of what the Zachary has. Zachary has 620 in grad. The object has or document the 620 in TA, so they cannot read or write it. Yes, you can always write at the same levels. Yeah, you can read and write at the same level if the categories match. Yes. So if they match both ways. That's correct. They match both ways. You can read and write. Okay. I'm not going to do the questions, but questions, yes. Look at them. Let's just do one here. There will be questions just like this on the exam. Okay. Hassan has secret COMP620 clearance. What access does he have a document secret 422? Well, that's easy. You can do both, read and write. That's easy. Try another one. Marcus is top secret COMP620. What access do they have document secret 420? Well, okay. He does not have, yes, you're right, there's no subset, so you can't read it and you can't write it.
Would it ever be a top?
Oh, none, frequently. This is a none. There's none right here. Going to the Microsoft Windows permissions. The thing to remember here is that deny is the highest priority. If you deny a user access to an object, that's it. No matter what other permissions they have from other groups, they can't get to it. Otherwise, it's the obvious full control, which gives you everything, full control, is higher priority than write. Write, by the way, also allows you to read and execute. Read and execute allows you to read and execute. And read can just read, you can't execute. Let's try this one. Okay. Poll, where the polls? Here is my genetic poll. You can see the problem. Okay. If you're ready for the exam. Hold up so you can see it. Okay, anybody else got it? Oh, okay. Then. Yes, the answer is B. The answer is B because, yes, Fred is a member of write. Write is higher priority than read and execute, so he can write. And stop sharing. Get out of here. Okay. We talked about Biba before. All right. Having written part of the exam, be ready for questions about the Bell Laputa model and the Microsoft Access questions. There'll be multiple choice, just like we do during class. Be ready for them. There'll be questions about what's the best way to encrypt something? Given a certain situation, what encryption techniques work best? Be explicit. Don't omit anything. Yes. So if I give you a situation and I'll say, well, how would you encrypt this? Tell me how you're going to do it. Mention encryption modes, mention encryption algorithms, mention any. If you're going to store initialization vectors in the file, you better tell me. Hashing passwords. Yes, talk about hashing passwords. And RSA parameters. I told you how to make keys. Understand that. That will be there. Okay, the final exam is Wednesday. All day. Keep track of how long it takes you. Hope it doesn't take you 18 hours. I'm going to say you can start and go back. I think I did that in the homework assignment, which I probably shouldn't have for the homework assignment, but I'm going to do it for the test. So if you wake up bright and early in the morning and you get up there and you log in, and at 6 a.m. in the morning, you're working on it, and about 8 a.m., you're bushed, you've had it, you can log on a Blackboard, but come back later in the evening and keep working on it. Keep track of how long you spend. Question, yes, sir.
Yes, I have a question about so let's say the highest. So but there's no read, only thing they can do. There's no read. When you can't right now, you can the highest.
About on the highest level, you can always access things on your level. About the Bell Laputa model, somebody asked, what can the top secret people do? Because there is no level above them. You can always write on your level. They can't, there's nothing above them, so they can't write up, but they can write at their current level. They can write top secret documents.
So they only stay in test.
Right. They can't write anything lower because that would be giving information away. Okay. And again, Wednesday, we will not be having class. Don't come to Graham Hall 208 at 4:30 Wednesday because I won't be here. But I will be online if you have any questions, which is kind of pointless because at any time, if you have issues about the questions, give me a call, send me a text, send me an email, and we'll try to figure it out. Now, I'm not going to tell you the answers. I've been helping people out with the homework. So we get on there, we zooming together, and we step through. We're not going to do that on the exam. You got to figure it out. But if you don't understand the question, I will gladly explain it to you. Okay, that's enough for today. Good luck on the exam. Remember, also that Tuesday, tomorrow at noon, the homework assignment is due. If you are using an Apple on this assignment, I'm sorry. It's much more difficult on an Apple than it is in Windows systems. I didn't know that. It can be done. I've seen it done on an Apple. So it can be done. If you are going to import the key into the system using keychain access, you'll want to give your file store the extension PFX, Paul Fox X-ray. It seems to like that. Make it a login certificate. It gives you system, something else, logins, click for login, PFX, keychain access. It can be done. That's it then. Good luck. Let me know if you have any questions, issues, and we'll. Yes, for Apple. If you're Microsoft, it seems to work much better.
All right, does this work?
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams.